Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a few moments here. Okay, I see more folks are joining. Good morning. So we will slowly kind of go ahead and get started. My name is Christy Allen. I'm a Knowledge Translation and Implementation Coordinator with the Waypoint Research Institute, and I'm excited to welcome you to our March session of Waypoint Talks. This session is on cyberstalking and social media, keeping up with an ever-changing crime, and this will be hosted by Will Fox. To get started, we'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. The Waypoint Research Institute is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee, Six Nations, Mohawk of the Wata community, Huron, Wendat, and Métis people. We acknowledge and affirm our commitment to improving relationships between nations and to improving equity for Indigenous communities residing in the Central North region of Ontario. So welcome to Waypoint Talks. This is a virtual webinar series offered by the Waypoint Research Institute where we aim to highlight the practical implications of research projects. We also have a complementary series around building your research toolkit. This is a virtual education series that aims to highlight best practices used in mental health research, quality improvement, and program implementation. These events are open to all who are interested in learning about emerging research, best practices, and clinical innovation. So a couple of housekeeping notes. If you've come to our webinars before, these are all the same, except that we did want to note we've switched over to using Teams webinar. This does have the same functions as our previous series, so please feel free to use the chat box Q&A function to connect with speakers and fellow attendees, and there will be dedicated time at the end of the presentation for questions and discussion. The recording and slides will be available post-event on the Waypoint Research Institute website, and we do ask that you complete our post-event survey to share our feedback and help improve future sessions. There are also attendance certificates for professional development available, and we'll share how to access those at the end of the presentation. So I'm pleased to introduce Will Fox. He's a late-stage experimental PhD student in the field of law and forensic psychology at Simon Fraser University. His MA thesis examined cyberstalking of social media influencers on Instagram, and his PhD thesis comprises 3 more studies in the same area looking at case law and victim safety factors for influencers who are victims of stalking, as well as the link between parasocial relationships and influencer stalking. He has also recently contributed to a chapter on cyberstalking and on the new handbook of social media and violence. So welcome, Will, and over to you.
Thank you so much. Just go ahead and share my screen here. All right. Can I just confirm that's working? It's showing. Okay. Thank you so much. All right. Hello everyone. Thanks for being here to listen to this presentation on cyberstalking, and thanks of course for the invitation to speak. This isn't the lightest topic in the world. Nothing in forensic psychology rarely is, but I won't be getting too much into the dark stuff today, but hopefully I can give you a broad overview of cyberstalking and give you an idea of the state of the field as it is currently. So first we've got to get into some definitions. So I imagine many of you will have at least some familiarity with the idea of stalking, the topic of stalking. You might know that the definition of stalking can get a bit muddy in academic literature. People tend to disagree as to precisely how it should be defined. But for the purposes of this talk, we'll be defining it as a form of targeted violence that involves repeated and unwanted communication contact or other conduct towards a victim that causes the victim or would cause a reasonable person in their position to fear for their safety or the safety of others. Stalking is often motivated by romantic desire or sexual desire, a desire to initiate or maintain a relationship. But that isn't always the case. Stalking perpetrators can also be motivated by revenge, grievances, a desire to harm or frighten someone. But the most important thing to remember about it is that it is a relational crime. It's one where the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator is the driving force behind the behavior. And stalking behaviors can be incredibly diverse. Perhaps even most crucially, they can be legal outside of the context of stalking. So, for example, giving someone a gift is a very easy one to use as an example. It's perfectly normal, perfectly acceptable, perfectly nice to give someone a gift. But if someone has made it clear that they don't want any gifts from you, and you keep sending them gifts over and over again, repeatedly and unwantedly, that crosses the line into stalking behavior. And you can even take this further. So maybe that person, because you won't stop sending them gifts, they have to change their address. So you can't send them gifts anymore. And you have to work really hard to find their new address so that you can keep sending them gifts. And maybe one day they come home thinking that they've escaped you and they find a gift sort of lying on their bed. You can see where this can sometimes become a criminal behavior. But there are lots of behaviors that can fall under the scope of stalking. As I say, it's very diverse crime. In fact, it's so diverse that it's hard to come up with an exhaustive list of those behaviors for legal purposes. It's much easier just to say communication, contact, and this broad brush of other conduct to cover basically everything else. But common behaviors include repeated attempts at contact, spreading rumors, following the victim, and even in some cases escalating to contact offenses like physical or sexual assault. Um, and some of those earlier behaviors can be seen as quite benign, both to victims and to third parties. So sending someone a lot of letters might just be looked at as annoying as opposed to criminal. And sometimes it can be hard, even for law enforcement or other legal professionals, to tell the difference between a case where a perpetrator is engaging in stalking versus just being a nuisance or harassing generally, which can make it a particularly tricky crime to deal with. The victim might not take the behavior seriously until it escalates. Law enforcement might not take it seriously when it's reported because the behaviors seem relatively harmless to them without context. And that can give stalking perpetrators a lot of time to sort of get away with it. And in some cases, even behaviors seen as harmless can take a real toll on a victim over a long period of time. And in other cases, without intervention, the behavior can escalate to very serious criminal actions like threats, contact offenses, breaking and entering, and so on. You may or may not know that the United States' first stalking laws were created after the attacks on the Hollywood actresses Teresa Saldana and Rebecca Schaeffer back in the 1980s. And at that time, both victims were targeted by stalkers who were able to access their addresses via the Department of Motor Vehicles. And that took a fair amount of effort on the part of the perpetrators. But it's an early example of essentially information systems being accessed by stalkers and being used to then access the victims themselves. And as technology has evolved, it's become far easier for stalking perpetrators to locate and contact victims via methods like GPS trackers, spyware, hidden microphones, key loggers, etc., etc. And of course, the internet and social media, which has connected the entire world and made personal information more readily available to strangers than ever before. And thus, cyberstalking is born. Uh, so we know what stalking is. Cyberstalking is the same pattern of unwanted and repeated communication, contact, or other conduct, but specifically perpetrated through electronic means. So using hardware like computers, smartphones, and digital forms of connection like email, instant or direct messaging, social media, etc. In cases of cyberstalking, you tend to see a perpetrator's capacity for diverse or frequent behaviors increase because they have a lot of low effort options for harassing a victim that technology enables for them. So sending repeated and unwanted messages is much easier via a text or a direct message than a letter. Perpetrators can post embarrassing information about a victim online. They can post or share sexually explicit material, either sending things to the victim or posting nudes in cases of revenge porn and things like that. Perpetrators can impersonate a victim online. They can impersonate someone else to get in contact with them in cases of sort of catfishing. Um, they can easily send intimidating or threatening material. They can track a victim's location electronically or by stalking their social media. They can gather personal information about a victim more easily in a lot of cases, and they can attempt to gain access to a victim's private online accounts, uh, including social media accounts or financial accounts. Um, and it can be difficult to stop a perpetrator from initiating contact. They might create multiple accounts to circumvent blocks or account bans and things like this. Um, and of course, now there are even more complex cases where people, in cases of impersonation, people are able to make AI deepfake versions of someone, or either to catfish them or to impersonate someone. It is it is spiraling, maybe not quite out of control, but it is certainly spiraling. Um, uh, Now, there's some debate as to whether cyberstalking should be considered its own unique form of behavior, or whether it should be considered an extension of the construct of offline stalking. Uh, but it does seem that they're fairly similar constructs, and often victims will experience both offline and cyberstalking at the same time. Still, there are obviously differences. So, um, cyberstalking is strictly a remote behavior. Perpetrators can access a victim or many victims even with ease. Victims are essentially always within reach of a perpetrator. Uh, Cyberstalking perpetrators can also remain anonymous more easily and are more likely to be strangers or acquaintances compared to cases of offline stalking, though partners or ex-partners are still very common. And most importantly, because cyberstalking involves the use of technology, the methods perpetrators use evolve as technology evolves, hence the spiraling. So uh, basically, this means that their tactics can change very quickly. Tactics like using online search engines to uncover a victim's online profiles and contact details, or finding their location using location data, metadata that's embedded in a victim's social media profiles. Um, these tactics are almost impossible to detect and trace, and obviously they were unheard of before search engines and metadata were even heard of. Um, Before that technology emerged and made them possible, nobody could have predicted it. So it can make it hard for law enforcement to keep up. It's hard to predict where this technology is going to go and how it's going to be used for these crimes. And this makes it really hard to recognize and respond to new manifestations of cyberstalking. So just like in offline stalking, we often see intimate partner cyberstalking or IPC, where the behavior is perpetrated by the victim's current or ex-partner. If you're familiar with the concept of coercive control, we see that in IPC as well. This might manifest as threatening emails or messages, monitoring the partner's behaviors using hidden cameras, spyware, accessing their private accounts, or using threats of releasing private or sexually explicit material online to control the victim. uh, Cyberstalking is also quite strangely, to some extent, more normalized than offline stalking behaviors. So social media is everywhere, huge part of everyone's lives, and it's becoming more and more socially acceptable to gather information on a person by quote unquote stalking their social media profiles. This behavior has been termed passive cyberstalking in the literature, and it's certainly more of a gray area than some of the other forms. Um, Perhaps we can't say for certain that the behavior is unwanted if the information is being posted publicly, but unless someone is using privacy settings, like only allowing friends to see their profile, which most people don't use, uh, they really have no control over who is looking at their profile. And because we have a society that really values having an online presence, people are essentially expected to have their personal information, life updates, photos publicly available. And because that's expected, it's also very common to see passive monitoring of other people's social media profiles. Um, this might be due to a fear of missing out, FOMO, a need for social comparison, or monitoring a possible or even current romantic partner. So um, these behaviors are so commonplace that the term stalking is just a part of the common nomenclature now. It's fairly common to hear someone innocently saying that they Facebook stalked someone before asking them out, for example. Um, and we don't really know whether this kind of passive cyber stalking is predictive of more severe stalking behaviors yet. We definitely need more study there. But certainly the pervasiveness and the perceived acceptability of the behavior can muddy the waters even further when it comes to the detection and reporting of serious cyberstalking cases. Speaking of muddied waters, there are some issues in the field of cyberstalking that make research difficult, particularly due to inconsistencies in definitions and wildly different rates of prevalence reported across studies. So, if you go out and read a lot of cyberstalking studies, you're going to find inconsistency in the way cyberstalking is operationalized, with different measures of behavior being used to define the same term. There are inconsistencies in how many times a behavior needs to have occurred for the authors to consider it repeated, how long a behavior has to have persisted before it's included in a study, and whether the victim needed to have experienced fear as a result of the behavior for it to be included. Um, and this lack of a standard definition can cause real problems. It makes it hard to compare between different studies because they're measuring essentially, they're trying to measure the same construct, but they're measuring different constructs. And it can make it difficult to draw real conclusions about the ground truth of cyberstalking. We don't know who's getting it right, and we don't know whether any of the findings are consistent. Um, and so, for example, the fear standard is a pretty common debate across the whole of stalking literature, offline and cyber. Um, People essentially disagree as to whether a victim needs to feel afraid before a behavior can be considered stalking. Um, Many stalking laws require the fear standard to differentiate between uh, stalking and sort of plain harassment. Um, for cyberstalking, this is quite the problem because remote online victimization just tends to result in low levels of fear. Victims are less likely to be afraid of receiving a direct online message compared to an offline contact. Um, and it seems that around 30% of academic studies include fear as a vital criteria for defining cyberstalking. So most researchers don't consider it to be worth including, which puts it at odds with some legal definitions. Um, but there's also a disparity there, right? 30% of studies are measuring cyberstalking differently to the remaining 70%. And if you add that to all the other discrepancies, we can be left with some pretty unreliable data. uh, it's hard for us to get a good idea of how common cyberstalking is, even. So we already have to contend with low rates of reporting and various other obstacles that I'll get into later. But we also tend to make things difficult for ourselves as researchers. So a review of cyberstalking literature found reported prevalence rates of cyberstalking varied from 3% to 85%. And you know, that's a spectrum so wide as to be deeply unhelpful, and it's because of inconsistent methodological approaches. So the 3% figure comes from a study that operationalized cyberstalking very specifically. The behaviors they listed had to have occurred at least twice for it to be repeated. They measured behavior experienced across an 8-month period, and they included the fear standard. Whereas the 85% defined cyberstalking purely as the victim having had their email inbox flooded with unwanted emails over a 1-year period. It must have been repeated. It must have been negative, though not necessarily fear-inducing. And they measured prevalence on a Likert scale from 0 to 4, where anything from a 1, which was rarely experienced, the behavior, to a 4, which is very frequently experienced, counted towards prevalence. And as you can probably imagine, there's a lot of negative, unwanted emails that one might receive that wouldn't count as cyberstalking. And you can see here how a more narrow definition, shorter time frame, inclusion of the fear standard, and requiring participants to include a number of times they experience the behavior, it results in far lower prevalence than a study that uses a broad definition over a larger period of time, doesn't require the fear standard, and has a more vague or loose measurement of frequency. And that's how you get nearly opposite findings when measuring the same construct. Now, I'm not bashing either of these studies. You know, they're perfectly within their rights to measure this however they want. And most studies don't have this extreme level of difference. Most fall somewhere in the middle. But I do think it's useful to compare just to see how much a difference the methodology can make. So what the heck is the prevalence of cyberstalking in the real world? Studies that measure lifetime cyberstalking victimization tend to find prevalence rates somewhere in the 35 to 46% range. We can also look to government surveys, though they vary in their definitions of cyberstalking as well, based on the country. So the US found 15.6% prevalence for women and 5.2 for men. Though they asked about receiving unwanted social media messages specifically. Canada reported an 11% prevalence among 15 to 29-year-olds for receiving unwanted messages or having private information or pictures posted on social media. And it was 7% for all internet users aged 15 and over. And England and Wales defined cyberstalking as repeatedly sending obscene or threatening messages or posting personal, obscene, or threatening information about a victim online. So you can see more stringent definition there, and they found a prevalence rate of 1.5%. All of these surveys required fear to be present for it to count. And even here, you can see different definitions, different timeframes, different years the surveys were conducted, with some of them being quite outdated, getting different findings. And my point, which hopefully is pretty clear, is that we really need to settle on a consistent definition of cyberstalking, or break it up into individual definitions. Else, these problems will continue to sort of drag the research down. Though, of course, getting everyone to agree on one definition is easier said than done. All right, enough about the research methodology. Let's let's talk about impacts. So, because cyberstalking is a remote crime, the impacts on victims are psychological. Victims of cyberstalking have reported a feeling that the perpetrator is sort of omnipresent or everywhere, always able to reach them through everyday technologies like phones or computers, which can be really hard for a victim to disconnect themselves from. Day to day. They're just it's hard to do that. We use them every day. They're very important for our quality of life, comfort, etc. Um, and the levels of psychological distress experienced by victims of cyberstalking seem to be similar to those experienced by offline stalking victims. Um, Psychological outcomes can include paranoia, so particularly distrust of people and technology, anxiety, PTSD symptoms, fear, suicidal thoughts or attempts, or self harm. And they may also experience some psychosomatic symptoms like heart palpitations, stomach aches, and things like that. And there's also a financial burden in some cases. So victims may need to spend money to increase their online security. They might need to move homes in particularly severe cases, or um, pay for therapy or online counseling. Social impacts can include victims withdrawing from their real life and online social groups, which can lead to feelings of isolation, loneliness, hopelessness, and of course, these impacts will vary case by case, but the potential for severe negative outcomes, particularly psychological trauma, is very real and needs to be taken seriously by anyone dealing with a cyberstalking case or victim. Saying just close your eyes, just turn the computer off, um, it's just not good enough. Uh, and I'd like to briefly mention the role of gender in cyberstalking literature. So, offline stalking is typically seen as gendered, with male perpetrators targeting female victims most often. Um, there's some debate around that now. It might be more that there are equal levels of perpetration, but a difference in severity, with men being more likely to engage in more harmful stalking behaviors, and less likely to consider behaviors targeted towards them to be harmful. Um, the findings are similarly muddled in cyberstalking research. There's plenty of evidence that shows um, higher rates of victimization in women and young girls, higher rates of victim blaming for women, greater suffering, more severe consequences for women's work and social lives compared to men. Women are more likely to perceive cyberstalking as harmful, less likely to be taken seriously when reporting, and more likely to accurately identify cyberstalking behaviors and to consider them illegal or unacceptable. These findings extend to transgender women and non-binary individuals, with essentially non-males being seen as more gratifying targets for perpetrators, while men are frequently found to be perpetrators more often. But it isn't so simple. There are also plenty of findings that show gender either plays no role in cyberstalking perpetration, or victimization. And other studies have found women perpetrate more often, while men are victimized more often. Some evidence suggests women engage in passive cyberstalking more often and engage in covert or discreet intimate partner cyberstalking more often. Meanwhile, gender biases emerge among third parties' perceptions um, of cyberstalking cases, with male victims being seen as less in need of help, and female perpetrators more often being seen as harmless or just engaging in regular courtship behavior. The debate continues, but I do think it's worth keeping in mind these biases. Should you ever encounter cyberstalking cases that sort of don't fit the gendered standard. Uh, so as I mentioned before, cyberstalking is more likely to involve strangers and acquaintances as perpetrators, and this makes sense because cyberstalking is remote and often anonymous. Even if the perpetrator was known to the victim, there's no guarantee that they could identify them. Cyberstalking is also more likely to involve third-party stalkers, so that is people who join in with the stalking, sometimes because the primary perpetrator asks them for help, or encourages them to get involved with the harassment for whatever reason. Personally, I find it a little hard to imagine, but it's more common than you would think. Um, in any case, there's some evidence that acquaintance perpetrators are most likely to be a victim's peer, but not somebody that the victim considers to be a friend. This might be because the perpetrators really want to be closer to the victim, but find themselves unable to bridge that gap for one reason or another, and engage in cyberstalking in the hopes of building a deeper relationship, even though their strategies are inappropriate and harmful. And non-stranger perpetrators tend to be uh, motivated by this kind of affection for the victim, compared to ex-partners who are more likely to be motivated by a sense of rejection after a breakup. And while rarer, a perpetrator might be a friend of the victim or someone who has regular access to them, like a classmate or a colleague. And these perpetrators tend to induce more fear in the victim, likely because of their proximity to and familiarity with the perpetrator, and maybe the shock of the reveal as to who it is. In terms of motivations, so when victims identify the sort of how they perceive their perpetrator's motivations, they tend to fall in one or more of the following main categories, those being affection, rejection, obsession, and retaliation or revenge. Perpetrators motivated by rejection or revenge tend to induce more fear in the victims, while affection tends to be the least fear-inducing motivation, though someone motivated by affection is certainly capable of doing major harm to the victim, even if they believe themselves to be acting out of love. It can be deceptively dangerous. A victim might think, well, they wouldn't hurt me even if they're acting strangely, but obviously these motivations can develop in strange and dangerous ways. Uh, Other motivations might include jealousy, delusions, a desire for control, hatred, or a desire to hurt the victim, sexual gratification, thrill seeking, anger. All of these can come into play. Jealousy might be over the victim's relationship status. So, I want to be with this person and they have a partner and I'm mad about that. But it can also be over things like wealth, status, and cyberstalking, particularly online reputation. Um, Delusions can come into play in cases where the perpetrator might be suffering from mental health issues. In offline stalking, you see things like erotomania or delusional disorders, where the person has delusions of the victim trying to start a relationship with them, sending them hidden messages and signs, things like that. This is better researched in offline stalking than cyber stalking, but I suppose I can say anecdotally I have seen examples of this in cyber stalking where someone has sort of believes themselves to be in a relationship with an influencer or someone like that, when the influencer has no idea who they are. And I think the rest of these motivations are fairly self-explanatory. In terms of risk factors for cyberstalking perpetration, we tend to see that perpetrators are more likely to be young, educated, well-performing, and technologically capable compared to offline stalkers. Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy, sadism, borderline traits, the usual suspects tend to pop up, but also rejection, sensitivity. These are all risk factors for cyberstalking. They can lead to neurotic thinking, insecurity, jealousy, impulsivity, and a need to sort of cling to a relationship in IPC contexts. Low self-control is a big one, maybe because so many cyberstalking behaviors are just a click of a button away. So even a sort of momentary lapse of self-control can be enough to perpetrate pretty heavily. You can send a pretty nasty message in a very short period of time. Perpetrators are also more likely to be involved in generally unhealthy and deviant online behaviors. So spending a lot of time online, disclosing personal information online, befriending online strangers, sexting, associating with deviant peers online, including other cyberstalkers. They're also more likely to have been victims of cyberstalking or other online and offline harassment or abuse in the past, and more likely to have substance or alcohol abuse problems. Probably few surprises there. Those tend to crop up. It seems in just about every crime as risk factors. Risk factors for victims include being non-Caucasian and non-heterosexual, being in a relationship, the presence of physical, emotional, and mental disability. Factors like ethnicity or employment can come into play for grievance-based perpetration. Anything the perpetrator would find aggravating or envious can motivate cyberstalking. Age can be a factor too. Some studies show younger victims are more vulnerable because they spend more time online, exhibit less caution, and engage in greater levels of personal disclosure. Though other studies will find being older to be a risk factor. Personally, I wonder whether age really does predict sort of time spent online so much these days. I feel like pretty much everyone is all in on social media. Um, Facebook has a lot of older people on it, and um, they are victims of harassment and scams and things like that all the time. Um, but so essentially, a lack of caution online isn't exclusively characteristic of young people. Victims tend to be more at risk when they increase their proximity to offenders. So in offline stalking, this might mean physical proximity, but for cyber stalking, it means sort of how accessible they are and how attractive a target they are for the perpetrator. So proximity can be increased through online exposure, which means prolonged internet and social media usage. Uh, the number of social media accounts that they have, adding and speaking to strangers online, things like that. It can also be increased by online disclosure. That's posting personal information, posting pictures, particularly flirty or suggestive images, and other risky behaviors, as they're termed in academic literature, like online piracy, sending and receiving sexually explicit photos, association with deviant or abusive peers, lack of online privacy measures, opening unfamiliar links, things like that. And of course, previous experience with interpersonal abuse, including offline stalking and cyber stalking, as well as alcohol or drug addiction. These all increase vulnerability. Now, I do like to be very clear anytime I talk about victim risk factors. I feel like in this field we can sort of walk a fine line between recognizing relevant risk factors for victims and victim blaming. So, for example, posting suggestive pictures on social media, sending nudes, things like that, engaging in any behavior doesn't make someone responsible for a cyber stalking perpetrator's behavior. Um, with that said, I do think it's important for us to understand what online behaviors might make someone more vulnerable or more attractive a target for cyberstalkers. So we can look at these things from a practical standpoint without placing any blame or responsibility on the victims themselves. So risk factors worth knowing, but protective factors inform ways that victims can keep themselves safe and make themselves less accessible targets for perpetrators. So these include being careful online, spending less time online and on social media, curating what information they're willing to post publicly, avoiding contact with strangers, being respectful and responsible when interacting with others online, and exercising self-control when it comes to risky behaviors. Victims should also be ready to recognize cyberstalking behaviors and to block perpetrators quickly. So if I ever impart any one piece of information about sort of how to protect oneself from stalking or a measure to take if you're the victim of stalking, it is to very clearly tell the perpetrator the behavior is not wanted, and then to completely cut off contact and never respond to them again, basically. Um, and the same goes for cyberstalking, though. If the perpetrator is a stranger, it might be more suitable just to block them without any contact at all. Someone random is just harassing you, you probably don't need to say, please stop this. You can just block them and not respond. Um, Victims should also have a good idea of where their personal information is and how it can be accessed, and be willing to change and hide any contact information that a perpetrator might get access to. Target hardening in this context would be making use of privacy settings, antivirus software that might catch spyware or other malicious software, keeping computer and hardware updated to keep it secure from hacking attempts, and generally increasing their knowledge of computers and cybercrimes. Increasing knowledge of cyberstalking in general is a big one. It helps victims see what's happening before it can escalate. And not surprisingly, when victims are more suspicious and avoidant online, they're just less vulnerable to cyberstalking. In fact, avoidance is an effective coping strategy for victims. So this can include avoiding technology through which the perpetrator can contact them, though this can be difficult, especially long term, as avoiding things like emails or phones can, really impact someone's quality of life. Most people can't put their phone down for an hour, and you need your computer for work and things like that. Um, So easier said than done in the case of cyberstalking, but effective. Another coping strategy that's not so effective, in fact, is detrimental to a victim's well-being, is confrontation. So expressing anger, fighting back, pleading for the behavior to stop. This can all result in worse outcomes for the victim. Often the perpetrator is looking for any kind of contact from the victim, and they'll only be encouraged by this kind of response. Victims might engage in formal and informal help seeking. So, informal help seeking is more common for cyberstalking victims. They're more likely to turn to friends, family, partners, or even service providers or online platforms where the behavior is taking place. Formal help seeking is reporting to the police or clinical practitioners or some other professional or authority. This tends to occur when the behavior becomes more severe. Uh, Escalation to threats is a common threshold for formal help seeking, as is the behavior interfering with the victim's employment, education, health, or finances, or if the perpetrator is known to have a criminal record, can make the victim more afraid and report formally. The decision to report might be influenced by the frequency of the cyberstalking behavior or the context in which it's taking place. So, a more benign behavior, if it's happening a lot, they're more likely to report it. And if the behavior is happening in the context of intimate partner cyberstalking, for example, that increases likelihood of formal reporting too, with current partners being more likely to be reported than ex-partners. You're also more likely to see victims reporting if the behavior has lasted between 1 month and a year. So if it's less than a month, they might not see it as serious enough yet. More than a year, and maybe it's just a case where if they sort of haven't reported it by now, they're just like less likely to report in general. So if a victim does formally report, what happens? Well, unfortunately, it's not always a smooth process. So there are a lot of obstacles that can make it hard to deal with cyberstalking cases. The first is an issue of jurisdiction. So cyberstalkers commit their crimes remotely, and they don't need to be in the same state, the same province, the same country, or even the same continent to make contact with a victim. Um, If a victim and a perpetrator are in different legal jurisdictions with different laws governing cyberstalking, things get complicated. Imagine that you are a law enforcement officer or a prosecutor investigating and prosecuting cases like these. You might have to contact foreign law enforcement agencies, which could involve dealing with ambiguous or absent cyberstalking laws, language barriers, time zone differences, uh, cultural differences. And in situations like this, local authorities might just give up because it's just not worth the effort. Um, Especially if they think the crime is minor or the behaviors they're seeing are harmless or benign. And this can leave the victim totally adrift. Uh, it might also be difficult or indeed impossible to identify a perpetrator, even if they're local to the victim. So perpetrators can use tools to remain anonymous online. Virtual private networks or VPNs can hide their location. They can change internet service providers, and legal authorities can struggle to help the victim when this is happening. Cyberstalking is also a diverse and, as the title of this talk suggests, an ever-evolving crime. Tactics and technologies used by perpetrators can change very quickly, and it can be hard for law enforcement to keep up, especially if there's ambiguity around whether a new manifestation of cyberstalking can be charged under the current laws. So consider the problems we're seeing now with artificial intelligence, where people are able to generate deepfake revenge pornography. It's hard to fathom this kind of technology existing. We all know it's illegal, but the specific laws didn't necessarily exist to tackle that specific problem, and laws are being enacted now, but the legal system is simply slower. It's catching up. It's slower than the evolution of the technology that it's trying to regulate. That's a problem. And to make matters worse, cyberstalking is growing in frequency. So, especially after COVID-19, which saw a huge increase in cyberstalking with everyone stuck inside with sort of plenty of time to ruminate and learn how to create fake social media accounts, impersonate people, create revenge pornography, learn how to use spyware and access CCTV and doorbell cameras, and hack smart tech devices like Alexa. You can see how it would be hard for law enforcement to keep up. And all of that is if a victim reports at all, which is far from a guarantee. So victims of cyberstalking, just like for offline stalking and many other crimes, can be very reluctant to report. Reasons for not reporting include a fear of stigma or not being believed, worries that it will lead to negative consequences, and particularly in their work or education, and a distrust of whatever professional that they're reporting to, their ability to understand and help with what they're going through. And these fears aren't entirely unfounded either. Studies find that police and prosecutors often rely on outdated cyberstalking data, and police rarely receive cyberstalking specific training, which can leave them unable to appropriately handle such cases. So, police tend to be less confident in their ability to understand and identify harmful cyberstalking behaviors compared to offline stalking. And victims have reported negative outcomes such as being judged, misunderstandings, being laughed at or treated flippantly, being blamed for the behaviors, or sort of overreactions, like a sort of uh, like a wielder of justice kind of response. Um, and this can understandably leave victims feeling like they've been failed or that they're being punished for reporting. And all of that is assuming that the victim themselves recognizes that they're a victim of cyberstalking at all. So many victims see the behaviors as harmless or legal, or think reporting wouldn't help, or don't realize that the behaviors are reportable offenses. Um, Awareness and understanding of cyberstalking among the public is just low. Studies show participants regularly underestimate the seriousness of cyberstalking, even in instances where there are clear negative impacts for the victim. This can be made worse by sexist attitudes or cultural attitudes that excuse cyberstalking. So, for example, female perpetrators tend to be seen as less in need of intervention, even when the behavior is identical to a male perpetrator. Ex-boyfriend cyberstalker behaviors tend to be seen as more acceptable than the same behaviors committed by strangers. And one study even found 18% of the female participants and 28% of male participants just considered cyberstalking to be acceptable, perhaps because they equate it with this kind of passive cyberstalking that we've discussed previously. So it's an uphill battle increasing awareness for cyberstalking, but it is a worthwhile one. It's a really important protective factor if we can get it out there. All right. Time for solutions. So the solutions to these problems, easy enough to share, much harder to put into practice, but here they are. So develop clear, regularly updated laws that cover known cyberstalking behaviors, and ensure that those laws allow for perpetrators to be pursued across jurisdictions. The laws need to be robust. They need to be able to keep up with cyberstalking as it evolves. They also need to compel internet service providers to assist law enforcement with recording and reporting cyberstalking behaviors taking place on their networks. Companies that own the social media platforms where these behaviors take place have to be more heavily involved in policing the behaviors. And furthermore, companies that are developing technology that can be used for cyberstalking, such as the recent case with Grok, the Twitter AI, Elon Musk's sort of Twitter AI chatbot, that allowed users to create deep fakes, basically allowed people to create AI generated images, which included deep fakes of people, including deep fake nude images of real life people, including children. These companies have to be held accountable for how their technology is being used, um, and they have to put measures in place to stop it from happening. We also need to increase police training for cyberstalking specifically, so encouraging open-ended questions, ascertaining whether the victim is afraid and whether they have already taken any protective measures to avoid victims feeling ignored or without competent help, and to improve prosecution outcomes by recording patterns of cyberstalking behavior. Increasing education on cyberstalking, both for the public and for professionals who might encounter such cases. Hopefully, this talk is a little bit of that effort, though. Of course, I encourage you all to look into the topic further if you think it might be useful or just interesting to you. Um, I sometimes teach a class on intimate partner violence and cyberstalking at SFU, and I dedicate many hours to talking about this stuff, and it still doesn't seem like it's enough. So an hour lecture isn't going to impart all of the information that you might need, but there's plenty out there if you're interested in it. But things like learning about more about digital security, cyberstalking behavior patterns, protective measures that can make it easier for both victims and professionals to recognize, report, and prosecute. And this is especially important for catching cyberstalking cases early and responding to them appropriately before they escalate, and for preventing the cases from going unreported altogether. Education can also focus on the safe use of technology and social media in general, what healthy and unhealthy social media looks like, topics like FOMO, especially for younger populations, and the kinds of mental health services and psychological supports that are available, both for victims and perpetrators. So some perpetrators might for example, benefit from therapy, and well, one might argue that they might all benefit from therapy, though it depends. Therapy doesn't work for everyone, but therapy and counseling to help learn healthy coping mechanisms around risk factors like rejection sensitivity, which might be motivating their cyberstalking behaviors. Regulation of social media platforms is also a big one. So these platforms can be doing more to regulate the behavior of their users. They can be doing more to promote healthy behavior and providing users with better protections against cyberstalking. At the moment, these platforms tend to reward compulsive social media use through their algorithms that are designed to keep people on the platform for as much time as possible. The more traffic they have on their platforms, the more money they're making from advertising revenue and selling user data. Uh, Essentially, they're profit motivated. They really have no incentive to act at the moment because it would cut into their bottom line. Any measure that you took to limit cyberstalking would limit traffic. So it's unlikely to happen without outside intervention. There are also technologies that we have access to that can be used to combat cyberstalking. Antivirus software can detect stalker apps and other data intrusion attempts. Social media users can make use of data encryption and data monitoring services to prevent and detect attempts at accessing their data. And using virtual private networks can hide a victim's whereabouts just as well as it can hide a perpetrator's. And I'll end off here with the most recent advancement in anti-cyberstalking technology, and that's the use of artificial intelligence. So um, I'm not the biggest fan of AI. Um, More so just the ways it is used, I feel is not always the best use of that technology. But we are one potentially good use of it is in this field. So um, managing large amounts of data is one area where AI is clearly superior to the human mind. Um, So, cyberstalking behaviors leave traces. Excessive surveillance and monitoring of the victim's profiles, use of false online identities, releasing private or personal information, aka doxing, accessing a victim's private accounts and information, unwanted contacts, communication. All of these acts leave digital traces that can be detected if the right software is applied to the task. It requires a combination of machine learning, data mining, and data analysis to identify and collect these digital traces for human review. So, for example, a digital trace might look like a person who is excessively liking or favoriting lots of a victim's social media posts in a short time frame. Sometimes people do this just to sort of be noticed. Um, a machine learning algorithm can be taught what this behavior looks like in excess, and it can flag it when it sees it. So, um, uh, language models and sentiment analysis can be used to examine comments and communications to identify mood and intent. And the algorithm can again be taught what counts as harmful and flag it when it sees it. And so, like I say, there's so much data out there on social media, and cyberstalking cases in particular can involve huge amounts of information for law enforcement to wade through. Some of which is pertinent and a lot of which is not pertinent. Machine learning can cut down on that workload tremendously, combing through masses of data in a fraction of the time it would take a human. Then a human could look through and carefully review all of the flagged content and continue on with the investigation or prosecution process as normal. It is early days for this kind of approach, but there are some promising algorithms emerging. There's the email-based cyberstalking detection model, which seems to be able to identify cyberstalking emails and can distinguish between true cyberstalking um, and other unwanted contacts like spam emails or fraud attempts and things like that. Um, Other frameworks include the Predator and Prey Alert, the anti-cyberstalking email system, and anti-cyberstalking text-based system, um, which essentially try to automate the capture, sorting, and documentation of large amounts of data from a victim's computer to filter and detect evidence of cyberstalking perpetration. Um, and that all sounds great. But one, to my knowledge, the models aren't quite there yet. It takes a little while for these models to be ready for use in the field. AI tends to have problems with accuracy, hallucinations, and things like this. And the consequences for it getting something wrong in a situation that could lead to a criminal case is pretty major. So human oversight is an absolute necessity and always will be. Um, Also, there are implications for online privacy. So if these technologies were to become commonplace, the implications are pretty murky. Um, in the case of the Papa, law enforcement have to be able to analyze all communication and traffic from the victim's device, which requires the sacrifice of a great deal of privacy. Would you want a program like that? Would you want every single piece of data coming to and from your computer to be accessible for law enforcement, even if it helps them uh, find and uh, charge and prosecute a stalking perpetrator? Maybe not. And that's not to mention the even more nebulous implications for free speech. So um, imagine the number of false positives that could occur where, a machine learning language model has been taught what language is bad and what language is okay. And it flags language that it's been taught is harmful, but that both parties that are engaging in it, uh, you know, they agree it's fine and they don't mind it. Um, if this is a route we go down, we have to be ready for situations where people are being uh, at least uh, at least having to deal with initial sort of legal contact from police or something like this, or at least having their conversations recorded and things like that. Um, uh, in the name of sort of casting a wide net. Um, so it's probably a good idea that if these systems do end up coming into play, that they are victim controlled, allowing victims to protect their own privacy and exercise discretion while reporting. So the information doesn't just go to the police. Instead, it goes to the victim, and they get to decide what is shared and what isn't. But even in that scenario, the risks to privacy and free speech have to be considered, and I think it's difficult to think about whether it can be instituted morally. But an interesting question nonetheless. And the last question I will pose to you, as that is the end of my talk. I thank you all for listening, and I believe we have a pretty lengthy period for questions here. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Will. And yes, we do have time for a fair bit of questions, so please feel free to add them into the Q&A function or directly in the chat. We'll keep an eye on both. Um, I did have one question maybe to start us out, and you sort of started to address it with some of those AI solutions and included some of those limitations, but you spoke about kind of the role and responsibility of social media platforms in regulating user behavior. And I wondered if you had any other ideas of what that could look like beyond some of those AI approaches.
Yeah, good question. So there are a lot of things that social media platforms could do. One would be to hire or invest in more sort of online security measures. some of these do exist. It's not like they don't already have some means of some teams measuring security issues and harmful users, but investing more heavily in that for the explicit purpose of dealing with cyberstalking perpetrators and victims, because it's happening all the time. Some kind of specialized hire, specialized group, specialized team that can field reports. A very clear reporting system, a very easily accessible and clear system of that users can go through that make them confident that if they report it, something will be done and it will go to a sort of a human being who knows how to deal with it, and more willingness to um, ban users from their platforms. So it's very easy for someone, if they get blocked or banned, to just make a new account, and it is possible to make that harder and harder for someone. Um, uh, Stalking perpetration tends to decrease the harder it is for someone to, the more effort they have to go through to do it, the more steps they have to go through to do it. So just adding more steps, like we've banned you and you need to make a new account, that alone can drastically decrease the likelihood of continuing. It can also, if you totally system ban someone where they had a really hard time making a new account, that could also work. I would also, to be honest, like to just see more of a culture of supporting users, encouraging healthy social media use. Um, I would like to see um, uh, more in the way of outreach from these companies for sort of essentially raising awareness of these problems. It's happening in their backyard, and a lot of these solutions, I think they could institute on their platforms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It also makes me think, I know a lot of this happens on social media, but I imagine within dating apps as well, there's a lot of integration between those two. And I know that some apps, if you're banned, it will recognize your photo even if you use a different phone number to try and sign up again. So it makes me think maybe there's some learning that can go across those two different platforms. But
Absolutely.
we've had a couple other questions come in. So thoughts on the role of Online Harms Act and potential of new regulatory body to enforce this, and more on sites like X, which claim American operation and are present in Canada.
Okay. So, uh, like I say, the legal system tends to be playing catch up in this area. Um, I don't know if I'm familiar with the Online Harms Act in particular. Um, do, 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 do. Mandatory reporting of ICP. I suppose I'll look into it further. My general stance on this is that I support pretty much any I support pretty much any advancement. That there is almost almost nothing being done currently, and so any amount of attention or um, law or act put into place to give victims more power, more ability to report, more recourse, is always going to be uh, beneficial. We really can't give enough power to victims in cases like this, because it's just like almost none of them report, and when they do report, nothing happens. I would like there to be an overabundance of these kinds of acts and legal measures, to be honest, covering every single possible permutation of the behavior, if we can manage it. Sorry, just to make sure that uh, just to make sure that victims are empowered and that legal professionals are empowered, right? So that law enforcement can easily look and see what needs to be done and how it needs to be done, and that it can be prosecuted very easily. So it can be tricky for, in a legal case, for a prosecutor to prove that anything wrong is even happening, because it's just, without the full context of what the victim has been going through, it can be very difficult for a judge or a jury to understand that it's worth the legal sanctions and consequences that are being suggested. So I haven't read it. I'm probably going to go read it immediately once I'm done with this. But generally in favor of any of anything like that.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Another question, do you have any website recommendations where we can find more educational information for teens or young people about how to be safer online?
Yeah, there's a ton. I mean, to be honest, I don't think you can go far wrong with looking to your local country sort of government sites. Um, I know that Canada has pretty detailed sort of Canada.gov or what have you. Um, will have very detailed uh, information and pertinent recommendations for what you should do if you are experiencing victimization like that. Um, and I recommend government sites because they're most likely to be in tune with current and updated laws. So it gives you a very good idea of sort of what legal recourse you have, or but they also tend to recommend safety measures like that. Um, but there's tons of outreach programs, charities, etc. Um, that that will provide very common sense information. Um, yeah, I don't think you can really go far wrong with most of the, to be honest, most of the things that are going to pop up in like the first 5 results on a Google search. If you sort of detail what your experience, if you or just say, how do I deal with cyberstalking, things like that, you're probably going to get some, especially from the government, some very good practical recommendations.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I think if folks are interested, Jessica, my colleague, has added the Canadian government's link to that question in the Q&A box. So it's great. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions right now, so maybe I'll pose one other, and then if nothing else comes up, we can start to wrap up. But
Sure.
one question I had was, all of this is obviously very, new in a sense with the evolution of the internet and social media. And so you did talk about kind of passive cyber stalking and things like dating culture and social comparison and FOMO and how some of these behaviors are normalized. So where or how would you delineate between kind of what has become regular social media use of perhaps looking someone up and these newer social norms and what becomes kind of genuine cyber stalking or harmful behavior?
Yeah, it's a good question. I get this question a lot, particularly from sort of nervous students who are worried that I'm describing these things and someone's going, "What? I do all of this," you know. So yeah, it's a really important consideration. I think, to be honest, the most important uh, method of delineation there is your behavior unwanted by the person that you. So if you're looking at someone's social media profile, do you have any inkling that they don't want you looking at it? Have they told you to stay away from them, or something like that, or do you just get the impression that they've stopped responding to you? Like, why are you looking up their profile? I think just gathering information on someone can be perfectly innocent, right? Like, we've all done it. We've all been like, oh, I'll check check this person's profile out. I'd like to know what they're up to, or checking in on people we went to high school with. Like, what are they doing? I hope they're doing well, or in some cases, I hope they're not doing so well, or what have you. Even then, it's pretty innocent, and doesn't really have an impact on the person. It's a really fine line between that and the kind of compulsive, unwanted, unhealthy versions. So, um, are you just looking at someone's profile who you have uh, a Bumble date with, or what have you, and you just wanna you kind of search their name and you want to get to know them, or just like see if there's any, you know, if there's any red flags, or what have you, or in some cases, if you, so a lot of passive cyber stalking by women, especially, tends to be to see whether their partner is engaging and is posting a lot of pictures with like women they don't know, or um, uh, sort of checking to see if there's any irresponsible sexual activity going on and things like that. Um, is it that, or are you doing it out of some kind of compulsion? Are you doing it out of some kind of need? Um, are you trying to learn information that you think they wouldn't appreciate you knowing? And I think most people are capable of recognizing when they're crossing that line, but maybe not so capable of caring whether they're crossing the line. And people who engage in more overt forms of cyber stalking, um, uh, definitely don't care. Uh, but I think, uh, so in offline stalking, we have information gathering as like an important behavior, and but that usually looks like calling around to people, or like going and finding their friends and asking about them, or trying to find private information and things like that. Obviously, not all information gathering in cyberstalking, in online, is can cross the threshold into cyberstalking. But are you trying to find information that isn't publicly available? Are you trying to find information for some kind of peculiar or hostile, ulterior motive? Are you trying to manipulate the person, right? So are you trying to gather information so that you can present a false version of yourself to them? Are you, all of these things can kind of compound, um, but they tend not to. It's hard to call it cyberstalking until the victim is being affected by it, right? So that usually involves some kind of contact. Um, and information gathering without any intention of actually contacting the person, maybe it's just one of those areas where there's never going to be anything we can do about it. So we can't stop people from thinking, we can't stop people from looking things up. Um, but maybe it's important to recognize, or record a pattern of information gathering once we see it cross over into a cyber stalking case. So then we can look back and we can see, oh, this person checks the victim's social media profile 200 times a day, right? Something like that. And then you can, even if 200 times a day is probably too much for anyone, but uh, that helps to inform a pattern, and inform like a relationship and an obsession, even if on its own we wouldn't even be able to detect it, or note it as unhealthy, or criminal. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, those are all great points. Thank you. Maybe we can end off with one last comment, and just if you want to add anything to this, but just a comment that someone had a situation dealing with a former employee, stalking and threatening them, and the local police were not helpful. And I think you have spoken a bit to some of those challenges that police and law enforcement may be facing in dealing with this type of crime.
Yeah. Well, I'm very sorry that happened. I Yeah, it is the simple fact of the matter that law enforcement tend to be under-equipped for dealing with this. Some departments have like a cybercrime department or something like that, people who are specialized in dealing with this kind of thing. But even those departments tend to be overworked. There's all kinds of cybercrime, right? And cyberstalking can sort of, I think, sometimes fall to the bottom of the pile compared to things like fraud or things like that, or hacking. And I have a lot of thoughts on why that happens. I don't want to get too far into sort of the deficiencies of modern law enforcement and things like that. I think it's just like a misallocation of resources, overstretching of police into far too many duties. I would like to see resources allocated to just like dedicated people who can deal with this, who have had sort of the stigmas and the um, uh, uh, inadequate responses and things like that sort of trained out of them, um, so that people don't have experiences like yours. Um, Now, sometimes a cyber stalking case, it unfortunately just will be the case that the information the victim can provide to law enforcement simply is they actually can't do anything about it, right? It's not actionable for whatever reason. It might be because the perpetrator is completely anonymous and they're just like, well, we just don't like we can't find this person. If we can't find them, there's nothing we can do about it. But that doesn't mean, even if they can't take any kind of legal action, that doesn't mean that they can't take any action at all. Um, just recording that it's happening, and making a record of it can be useful, so that if it happens again, the police have sort of a record of this going on, and uh, and things like that. It can also just, the response from the police can be empathetic, and it can be comforting or educational and things like that. Even if they can't do anything to target the perpetrator, they can provide advice and assistance for a victim, um, as to how they can limit the kinds of contacts they're getting, or what have you. Um, and I think it's a great shame whenever a victim goes to law enforcement and comes away feeling like nothing has happened. And I don't think that really ever needs to be the case, unless the person is bringing forward like a totally frivolous thing, or something. Um, there is always something that the police should be able to do, but they don't always have the training, they don't always have the resources, and they don't always have the knowledge to deal with it appropriately. And there are a lot of ways I could see that changing. More training, more resources, or creation of additional sort of departments or something like that that deal specifically with this, or better signposting or redirection to other services. Um, I hope, who knows what whether research is going to go anywhere practically useful. But one of my hopes is in pursuing this kind of research is that maybe we will see changes like that in the future, and fewer people will have to have experiences like that. Um, that's my take on it.
Thank you so much for those points, Phil. That's great. With that, I think we can move to wrapping up. So thank you very much, Will. That was a really interesting session, and thank you all for joining us today. Just a quick reminder, the recording and slides will be up on our website in the coming weeks. Please complete our post-event survey. We do appreciate your feedback, and I'll send a note in the chat, but if you would like a professional development certificate for this session, please feel free to reach out to me via email and we'll get that sent your way. Thank you, Will. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.